Welcome everybody to Competitive Capacity Management Principles for Accounting Professionals. I can't wait to talk through this content. It's going to be so good. I've been dealing with this in my own firm, my partner and I, a lot. And so we've been learning a lot about how to pivot during the pandemic, how to move our team around, how to leverage a team, and capacity is a key to that, and I'm going to be talking about it. So let's dive in. I'm so excited to do this with you guys, so thanks for joining us. And just to dive in, let's talk about the agenda. What I want to do is really the first part of this is really going to be theory. So a lot of people may not understand what capacity is or actually how it's efficient, but really any creative services company, if they can leverage capacity, they're really going to become an efficient entity, and few do it well. So in our journey, I'm going to be actually making the conclusion up front that I want you to get from this session, and then we're going to follow that up at the end too. But just bear with me and walk with me as we go through the initial part of this slide deck. And we're going to be talking a lot about the theory of capacity management, what it means. And then I'm going to take you into some practical ways you can manage capacity in your own firm. And I think a lot of people recognize that word, capacity. But it is a tool to leverage, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. I'm going to teach you how we do it in our own firm. But we got to teach the theory first. So just stick with me through the theory, and I think a lot of it will make sense because a lot of the things we're going to cover in the theoretical part of the education part of this deck, I think you're going to recognize a lot of the things. And I hope to put some pieces together to help you understand how it all fits together. So let's dive in. And we're going to dive in with the whole conclusion, the whole takeaway of capacity management. So I'm just going to read this to you. I won't be reading all of the words on this slide deck, but I am going to read this one to you because I think it's important. I want you to get all the aspects of it. So here's my big takeaway, and this is going to be the takeaway I'm going to end with at the end of this deck as well. So here it is. A firm's ability to manage its capacity is key to its success, long-term growth, and future succession. As a firm, as a professional that's growing your firm, it is key to succeeding in your firm. And then growing in this core competency produces highly valuable firms that's difficult to compete with. So again, why at the end, you see that sentence at the end, it's a key to becoming competitive. And why is that? It's because as services companies scale and grow, they actually need more structure to scale and grow. So in our firm, we work with digital agencies to help them grow and consult with the structure of their teams and their companies, helping them scale. And one thing we find is once you hit a team size of 8 to 10, 12, something like that, in a services-based company, what happens is they fail to implement a lot of structure that keep this company healthy. And what they do is they lose a lot of efficiency. So capacity, managing capacity, understanding capacity, what that means, what it is a key to gaining efficiency. And services companies who don't manage this well, you're going to find their labor metrics are high. And that's one way we understand that when we're working with our creative services companies is we test their labor metrics. And when we look through their labor metrics, we find they're high, especially in times of high growth, fast growth, more complex scoped agreements, bigger complex projects, maybe that the owners don't fully understand. Those are all places where you have to manage your capacity even better. So you have to really be careful to manage your capacity better in those situations. So knowing your capacity and managing it is going to allow you to be competitive. And I'm saying that because few firms really manage their capacity well. So that's kind of some of the things we're going to be talking about. So why is there a strategy to professional capacity? So let's look at the definition. That's what we need first to really understand professional capacity. So and this, I made this up. So I made it up from the things we learned in our own firm. So I hope this makes sense to you. And I think you're going to see now why it's written the way it is. So here's the definition I have of professional capacity, so you kind of know what we're talking about. The abilities of a professional or a group of professionals to exchange their expertise and their technical abilities. You're going to see, I call that ETA in a minute, and you're exchanging that for future revenue. So here's what capacity is. And, well, let me just speak from the point of view of an owner. So what an owner is going to do is they're going to hear of a project from a client, and that client says, I'm going to give you some money. So that revenue is exchanged internally with something else. The professional firm exchanges the intake of that revenue. They exchange it with capacity. That's what they're giving that client. They're saying, we're going to devote a group of capacity, a group of and we're going to see capacity is not only hours. A lot of people think it's just hours, so it's not only that. We're going to exchange our capacity for the revenue you're going to give us. So basically what a client is buying in a services company is focus. It's buying attention from that team. And so if you don't give the right attention, the right amount of attention, in whatever ways that it can be hindered, and there are a lot of ways your attention or focus on a client can be hindered, then that client is going to be hurt. So there is an exchange when you're thinking about the professional definition of capacity. You're exchanging revenue for capacity. That's what you're doing. And what that's going to do is complement and balance two things. It's going to balance a manageable work responsibility load for professionals. So the professional internal in the company, they're going to manage their capacity well and their workload. They're not going to be overworked. They're going to be perfectly balanced in the work they're giving out. Now, this is theoretical, right? That's what we're talking about. Now, on the other side, the client is getting the appropriate value from to the client. And those are the two things you balance, and they get out of whack. Now, in our profession, right, we have a thing called tax season. And when we go into tax season, what we do is we take in so much work, we have to exchange it with such a high exchange of capacity, right? That's why we work 80 hours a week during a tax season. Of course, we don't do that in our firm because we don't want to do that. So we manage our capacity in a way where we don't have to do those kind of things. But what you're going to see in like a tax season, that example, number one is the manageable work responsibility load is overtaxed, right? So there's not been a balance, right? Because the appropriate value to the client during tax season is a lot more people and a lot more tax returns need value to be produced in a shorter amount of time, right? That's because we have deadlines on tax returns. And so you get these imbalances, and firms that manage this well, especially as they're growing, if you're growing, it is more difficult to do this. But if you do this well while you're growing, you're going to be competitive, you're going to be efficient, and people can't compete with that because this is such a complex thing to manage. So let's kind of look at what I mean by it's a balancing act, and it's going to be related to these points number 1 and 2 in the definition of capacity. So on one side, working out of scope is a thing we've all been struggling with in the pandemic. In our firm, we have we have a scope of contract that we're serving our clients under. But what we've all done is we've helped our clients stay in business, basically, and go through this PPP nightmare, trying to figure out, now we're going through the forgiveness nightmare, trying to figure all of this stuff out. So we're serving our clients to help them. So we're kind of working out of scope. What we've done when we've worked out of scope is we're out of balance. We're out of balance from a manageable work responsibility load for the professional and the value for the client. It's kind of gone like this. The client's value has increased majorly, and we've been imbalanced in our workload, right? We're being overwhelmed, overworked, and it's really hard to manage that. So what this has to be is a short-term solution. It's okay during this pandemic period, but I just want to say to you, you do have to fix that, right? That's something every firm's going to have to fix. Every professional is going to have to fix. So what this does is when you continue to work out of scope, generally what you're doing is you're miscommunicating value to a client, and it creates poor client habits. They have expectations of you that they really shouldn't have, right? Because as professionals, we're meant to deliver the scope. We're meant to deliver the value for our commitment of our capacity and time and our focus. And we get that out of whack sometimes. When I hear people we consult with say, we're going to go above and beyond. Well, that's actually a foolish way to operate your business. You're not called by a client to go above and beyond. You're called to fulfill your scope and fulfill the value. And if you don't, you'll miscommunicate value and create bad habits in your client. On the other side, your burnout. is not going to be valuable for your clients either long term. So what you have to do is you have to re-engage with a scope that matches the value the client agreed to when they started paying for it in this contract. And that is major key, right? So this other side of the balancing act, we were talking about how we miscommunicate value to the client. Now on the other side of the scale, we're talking about the professional, the one given their capacity. And you're dealing with burnout. I know we are. And again, you have to deal with that. That's a short-term solution. You can't operate your firm forever that way. And I know we're all still in the pandemic, and we're still trying to figure out what is it going to look like, right? Through the winter, we're waiting on all kind of things to try to fix this. We don't know what the future is going to be. There is a point that you're going to be so burned out that you will have to re-engage with your client on what scope is meant to be. And you will need to bring this back in line. And so what we've told people before is it's okay to work short-term out of scope, but you will have to fix this so that you don't get relationships out of whack. Everybody's going to start learning poor behaviors, and we probably all have already learned poor behaviors. So this is something we're going to have to fix. So just keep that in mind. That's a practical takeaway we're going to have, is you're going to need to fix that. So let's talk about, as we're still defining the purposes and definitions of professional capacity, let's talk about two key human parameters affecting capacity. Two key human parameters we're dealing with is limited versus abundant, right? So your ETA, we've talked about that, right? So let me show you what that was. I'm going to scoot back. It's expertise and technical abilities. You see that up there and has a little star beside it. That's ETA, your expertise and technical abilities. We're going to talk about what that is, but basically every professional in the world has a limited amount of capacity. You do not have an overly abundant value of capacity. You don't. You can't add an infinite amount of revenue into your company and have an infinite amount of capacity to devote in exchange for that revenue. You don't. You're working with a limited resource, basically. And it's good that you understand that it's constrained. And what that means, any kind of resource that is constrained, that if you manage that well, that's a key to winning. When people recognize their limitations and they leverage those in a way that make them competitive where other firms don't do that. So let's talk about what I mean by expertise and technical ability. So expertise really is this past work that's accumulated into valuable knowledge. That expertise a lot of times comes from, and again, these are limited things, right? That's what we're talking about. This expertise comes from really a history of your experience in your profession, right? It's just, you just have a bunch of stuff in your head that you know. That is your expertise. And there's a limitation as to who you can give that to. Technical abilities is related to expertise, but it's not exactly that. It's really your time, commitment, and professional ability to perform unique services, right? So if you're a tax associate or something like that, you know tax really well. Maybe you're green and you're new out of school, but you do have the ability to do a bunch of tax returns during tax season. So your technical ability is probably a little bit higher than your expertise. Either way, they're limited. And why are they limited? Because you can only give them to clients one at a time, right? Unless you're leading a group or something like that. So you're dealing with a limitation on your capacity, and it's just good to keep that in mind. Another parameter to capacity and understanding it, the definitions, is the future of capacity versus the now. And so let me tell you what I mean by that. So capacity is a resource you manage in the future. And that's why when we all talk about, I want to manage my time better, well, it's really hard to do that in the moment. So if you want to manage your time better, that has everything to do with you owning your future. And we're going to talk about how to do that. And hopefully you'll understand you do that with a calendar. So when you look into the future, that is where capacity is efficiently and competitively managed. And few people reach out into the future and block off a calendar in the future. That's kind of practically what we're talking about. That's where you win. That's where you That's where your strategy is located. It's located in the future as to how you manage your capacity in the future. And what it allows you to do is properly plan, right? That proper planning is what allows you to not get out of balance, right? It's you thinking through how much capacity you're going to give for revenue. And if you're planning your time in the future, you're always aware when a new client comes with a project. You're like, well, I've been looking at the future of my calendar. I know what the next 6 months looks like. So no client, I can't take on that revenue right now because I don't have the people and capacity. Our capacity is restricted in our own firm. We just turned down a job that would have been easy to do. It would have been great to do. We would have done it well, and we would have made money doing it. But we said no because we know what our future looks like. The future is where capacity is managed. So keep that in mind. And then another thing that's important to understand is planning your professional work while you perform your professional work is very difficult to do. And let me just talk about how this works. So in the professions we work with, the creative digital marketing professions, that profession has figured out they have their technical creative people that deliver on the technical creativity, but they also have a group of people called resource managers or traffic managers or project managers. What they've done is the professional technical people have offloaded the management of capacity to another person. And our profession, the accounting profession, has not quite figured that out yet. Now, we have a project manager in our firm, and it's typically like an operations type project management person. And it is a highly valuable way to be competitive as you manage your capacity. What you don't want is a professional that's doing a lot of complex things, giving their capacity away for an exchange of revenue, while also managing processes, things in their workflow system, contracts. These things you can offload in total to a whole nother role called a project manager. And that starts to really give you a lot of capacity. What that does, even between those roles, if you take, let's say you have 7 technical professionals, and they're all trying to manage contracts, calendars, processes. They're trying to do things really well and do the technical tax returns, audits, and accounting, and technical payroll, multi-state payroll, these kind of complex things. But if you offload those 7 professionals' management of that work to a project manager, they just gain capacity back. And that's what really good firms do. They're always moving work around and they're creating roles creatively so that capacity for each professional grows in a way that enhances their ability. I mean, one thing we do is when revenue comes in, you don't even need to give that revenue to just any person in your team. You need to choose the capacity that's more valuable because some capacity is more valuable than other capacity. Like our leadership team, we may not give their capacity away for service to a particular client because their value should be devoted to the team. Their value should be devoted to higher valued clients. And so we'll get this client in, maybe it's an easier client. We'll give that capacity exchange, that revenue exchange for capacity in our firm. We'll give it to somebody that has a little bit lower expertise and technical abilities because the value of what the client's expecting is lower, so we can give them a lower valued capacity. This is pretty complex stuff, but managing these things is something the owners do, which you're going to see in a minute when we talk about it, when we talk about some of the practical takeaways. Okay, I want to give you a sense of competitive capacity ecosystem so you can start to gain a visual of exactly what competitive capacity management looks like. So we all understand time, right? That's one way to manage our capacity. Did you know location is also a way to manage your capacity? Different locations, and some of you may know this, if you go work in a coffee shop or work in your office or work at home, those affect how you work. And if you don't know that, then switch different places during the day when you're, in the middle of the day when you feel down and you've just had lunch or something like that. Go to a coffee shop, get a coffee, and work there. You'll change how you work. Location is a part of managing capacity. And for a virtual firm, we've been virtual for 8 years. We help our team manage that by pushing them out to co-works, pushing them to go different places, to leave their homes. These are great ways to manage and get better and stronger output out of a team like that. So what these are capacity resources to manage. I'll call these resources inside of the ecosystem. And resources are precisely managed. What I like to, when I say that, I mean you can know the management of them. They are very precise. You can do things to manage them, and which means they're very strategic. If time and location are known things, and I believe capacity resources to manage are precisely manageable, which means they're known. If they're known, it means you can reach into the future and manage them. And again, capacity is managed in the future. That's where you do it. And so planning where you're going to work is a key to competitive capacity management. Planning your time and what you're going to do in the future on your calendar is a key to capacity management. And nobody does this. Nobody does this when they're growing, and it is a key to being competitive. Now let's talk about what I call capacity trappings. These affect your capacity too, your mind and emotions. And if you don't believe me, then personally, think about your work. So let's say a hard project you're going through, a difficult, complex client you're going through, but personally you have things going on at home that you're struggling with, right? Your mind's going to be distracted. Often your emotions can be whipped up in a way that don't actually reflect reality, right? Everything's fine, but you have this emotional fear or something that happened to you. These trappings, they do affect capacity. Now, I would say these trappings are imprecisely manageable. They're localized, which means they're hard to control. And what do I mean by localized? So mind and emotions are owned by the people that are working, the professionals that are working. Their mind and emotions are the things that trap their capacity and still affect it, whereas time and location are things typically owned by the firm. And so what you're going to find is the team members, they take their mind and emotions wherever they're going, but the firm is what manages the time and location. And the balance of these, and I'm going to give you some practical tips toward the end, but the balance of these is what will make you competitive. And a lot of this is pretty theoretical stuff, but if you just get one takeaway from this session, it's going to be key. It's going to change how you run your company and how you think about your exchange of capacity for revenue coming into your firm. It matters how you do that. So I want to talk about a little bit about the management. So when I say the capacity resources, time and location, typically if these are able to be strategically and precisely managed, that means the firm is going to typically do that. And a lot of times the firm does that through a policy of the firm. The firm states, this is how we do it in our firm. Here's a policy, sign it at the beginning of a year. You agree, that you're going to devote this amount of time to us. You're going to work in our office, or you agree you're going to work at home virtually. These kind of commitments are things that the firm leads with. And then the mind and emotions are typically things that the employee and the team member, they take wherever they go. So they manage it. So as a leader of people, what you have to do is you have to be asking questions of your team related to their mind and emotions, while you can give them policies related to time and location to manage the capacity well. This is pretty complicated, and really how this rolls out into how you lead a firm is really important. Now, one more aspect of this ecosystem I want to point out is there are switching costs within capacity management. So anytime you're switching between resources and trappings of capacity, you're going to produce inefficiencies. And so let me just give you an example of how we do that in our firm. My partner and I plan our calendar a year in advance every year. So right now, November, December is the time we're planning our next year. We block out, we have no white space on our calendar. White space is unintentional space. Now, people think we're crazy when we do this, but we've been doing this for years. What we do is we take very seriously owning our calendars. So for a whole year in advance, we have it's called strategic calendar work blocking. We teach this methodology. It becomes an engine on which you can run your company. It becomes an engine on which you can manage your capacity, basically. So we know a lot about our future capacity. And that means strategically, we know what we've committed to and what we will not do. And so when we have revenue come in, now every dollar that comes in from your client, every dollar is not a good dollar, right? You can take bad clients with bad money, right? That you have no business serving. So we manage the strategy of our own capacity in the future, and we bump that up against clients pitching things that they want to bring into our firm. And we look at our capacity to know, should we do that or not? Now, when we manage those blocks, we're always managing based upon brain usage, right? So when I'm creatively writing a blog post, that's going to be a 2-hour or a 3-hour block, because I don't want to switch when I'm doing that creative work. Now, if I'm going to review a tax return or review some complicated payroll or something like that, or bring in some blown up set of books that a client says they're fine, right? And they haven't reconciled anything for, 17 months. If I'm diving into something like that, your block needs to be pretty large. What you don't want to do is switch between brain usage, right? Writing a blog post and reviewing a tax return take different types of your brain. And so you want to make sure your blocks match your brain usage. That's kind of managing your mind, the capacity trappings of your mind. And what it's really doing is managing the switching costs. So there is a switch. I think it might be a few minutes on either side. When you switch out of some activity and you need to switch back into it, you're going to lose a good 5 to 7 minutes in total by switching. Losing that 5 to 7 minutes is an inefficiency. That is an inefficiency that you're dealing with. So switching is a key part to managing your resources. Okay, so all right, I'm going to give you my takeaway again. A firm's ability to manage its capacity is a key to its success, long-term growth, and future succession in the community of accounting firms. So growing in this core competency is a highly valuable firm that's difficult to compete with. Now, let me just point out what this is. Managing capacity is a leadership move. Leaders manage capacity, right? Team members don't effectively manage their own capacity very well. That's why when my partner and I block out our whole calendar in advance, we have our team block their calendars out too. That's a policy of the firm. Time management is something we get to place as a responsibility on our team. We have a right to do that, to manage the successful capacity of our firm. And so we're being leaders when we're doing that. It's true, not all team love it, but guess what? They work here. They don't have a choice. And we care about them, and they know we care about them. And they know we want to be competitive. They know we want them to have time off. They know we know these things about them. So it is a leadership move to manage capacity in your firm. And I think it takes a strong leader to do it. And you know what else it is? It's professional development. If your team comes and says, hey, I want more professional development, teach them how to manage their future. Teach them how to manage their capacity. You know what? We've taught people these strategic calendar work blocking and capacity management tools. And you know what they do? They take this into their personal life. They start blocking off their weekends and they start killing it. They start accomplishing so many of their goals. They start accomplishing a lot of their hobbies in greater ways than they ever have. They spend more time with their significant others, their kids. I mean, capacity management is really, it is a human management technique that is very important, and it takes leaders to do it, and it is part of the professional development of teams. So, all right, we have a few more minutes. So these last points, what I'm going to do is talk to you about some principles and then some practical takeaways. What are principles, basically? A lot of times when I teach, I use the term principles. And principles are basically, these are just truths that can be stated that are generally true about a certain situation, right? So they're guideposts in life, so to speak. And when you see them, you'll see they're written kind of like truths. So we're going to hit 3 different sections of the principles and 3 different sections of the practical takeaways. So here's section number 1, limited capacity. This is one of the things we learned in principles. All service-based companies have limited capacity in the services they offer. That's a truth. You're operating within that, and you're going to be competitive when you start acknowledging that and you start managing that. Most firms don't. They don't understand the complexities of capacity. The strategy of managing capacity is found in planning the future of how capacity will or will not be used. You as the leader, you as a person, you're the one who defines the capacity you choose to give away in exchange for the revenue a client wants to give you. It's your choice to make as the professional, not the clients and not anybody else. So, and you're limited in that. So you do have to protect that and be proactive and strategic. I think a calendar is the perfect visual reality of your limitations, right? So if you say, all right, Jason, I love you're talking about capacity management. How do I do it? You do it with a calendar. That is how you do it. People who manage calendars are successful people, especially as you grow, especially as you do more complex things, especially as you commit to more, especially as you make goals, you want to go do bigger things in life. Calendars are the way you're going to do it because it is a visible representation that we all live within a constraint, which is our time, which is only one of the pieces of the ecosystem of capacity management. And so proactive management of limited capacity leads to higher levels of opportunity for more revenue, less inefficiency. So we talked about that. When you exchange capacity for revenue correctly with clients and you maintain that balance, you're going to get more opportunities of better revenue. You're going to make better choices of what revenue to not take. And you guys know that's important. There is work you do and that you shouldn't be doing, right? Because the client doesn't work well with you. So let's talk about these principles. For capacity resources, professionals don't always know they are inefficient or don't believe it when they're told. So this is interesting, and it's tied to this next one. The owners manage capacity, not the team. We've found our team is less aware of their own capacity than we are as owners. And that is interesting. So it's hard to ask a team member, hey, can you take this new client? They'll always say yes. What are they saying yes to? They're saying yes to more money. They're saying, do I get a raise? Of course I can take them because I get more money. Well, that's not the question. The question is, do you have the capacity to do it? Teams don't always know that they do. And using a calendar to plan in advance produces high value exchange of capacity for revenue. We've said that a million times. And planning different places to do your work produces higher output and prevents a lot of switching costs too. And again, planning the future prevents those switches. And then real quick, the capacity trappings principles. Inefficient capacity management can lead to poor client service. We talked about that balance burnout. Switching between blocks, planned and prepared, according to how the brain is being used, is where you create the most efficiencies. And switching between tasks and lists and emotional situations can be planned for better than we often do it. So let's hit the practical ideas. I want to really spend a few minutes on these, and I know we're running out of time. We got just a few more minutes. Limited capacity. All right, here's some ideas. You have the right and responsibility to define and direct how your firm works with clients and teams. That's you, the owner. You have the right. You can tell your team to block out their calendar a week in advance like we do. You get to tell your team that. It's doing a timesheet in advance, basically, instead of doing it historically. And when you do anything in advance in the future, it's always more strategic. It's always a better way to do it. Looking at the past and documenting things can be data, but it's not typically transformative. The future and managing the future that's what strategic means. Strategic means proactive. If you say, I want to be strategic, you're basically saying, I want to be more proactive. That's a future-oriented turn that you're making. Message your clients now, speak to them. Now what we're doing is we're re-engaging on scope and value balance in your capacity. You have to get that right. So it's time for you to start reaching out to your clients as you go into a new year, possibly into a new tax season. And we would say put a strategy and planning block on your calendar in the future. So every owner that owns a firm, owns a creative services company, should have a minimum, a 2-hour strategy and planning block on their calendar every week at the same time every week. That's where you grow your firm. And what you're doing is you're wedging into your calendar where you're doing a bunch of work for revenue. You're wedging in running a business. That's what you're doing. And then a project manager can help you manage the scope and the processes of the future. And here's some firm management ideas. Check in monthly to ask questions about capacity of your team. Develop a policy of time blocking for owners and team. We do that. And make a policy to produce digital notes and agendas for all meetings. You can put that responsibility on your team too. It's your freaking company. You can run it the way you want to run it. So make sure you do that and lead people the way you know is the most efficient and effective and is the most competitive too. It'll make you a stronger firm. So don't be fearful about doing that. Some team will push back on that, but walk them through that process and you'll be stronger once you do it. And then capacity trapping, some practical ideas. Check in monthly to ask questions of your team about their capacity in their mind and emotions. You can't ask particular things, right? But we say, how are you doing? What way can we support you the most? What are some things we're assuming you know that you don't know? Do you feel overwhelmed, overworked? What makes you feel that way? Because their feeling of being overwhelmed is not always an accurate perception of the reality of them being overwhelmed, and that's key. That's why you have to coach them and professionally develop them through a team member's own awareness of their capacity. And then create spaces where your team can talk about their personal lives and not feel like they're going to get hurt for it. Make a safe place where you can say, what's your life like? What are you struggling with? How can I help you? Let them say it. Getting those things out of their mind, the mind gets full, so you got to get things out of your mind. And that's why we have our team take notes and make agendas. It gets things out of their head, which is an effective way to manage the capacity trappings of the mind. And then give a title and job description to each team member. And you're saying, what is that for? That basically is really tightly defining who they are and really what they're meant to do and what they're not meant to do. So thank you for joining us for this capacity management talk. And if you want any more information on capacity management, I'm going to be teaching more about this. Make sure you reach out directly to me and my partner at info@thriveal.com, which is what we lead, and we'll be glad to help you. So thank you for joining us for this competitive capacity management for professionals session. I appreciate it.